I'm Lindsay Claiborne.
And I'm Mumu Shu, and you are listening to Beyond the Microscope.
This is episode 1. We're calling the big, air quotes, bang introduction. Hi everyone, I'm Lindsay, and welcome to Beyond the Microscope, our attempt at a scientific-y podcast.
I'm Mumu. Our goal for this podcast is to explore science, technology, innovation, and business through the voices of women. But since this is our first episode, we're actually going to start off by telling our own stories. So, Lindsay, why don't you start off?
And try not to screw too many things up. I am a digital and TV journalist by trade. I currently work at Fox Soccer, and I was a TV video reporter, producer for Reuters TV in DC and Los Angeles. I've covered pretty much every category you can imagine, but some of my favorite science-y and techie stories have been reporting on the BP oil spill from Venice, Louisiana, the remnants of the Exxon Valdez spill in Cordova, Alaska. I also got to hang out with some scientists at NASA's JPL labs in Pasadena and get some early looks at the Mars Curiosity rover. But on the whole, I've seen a lot of crazy things, got to see a lot of science before it's met the public sphere, and science and tech has never ceased to surprise and amaze me, and I'm really looking forward to talking to a lot of interesting women about what they're working on and what's coming up.
As for me, I received my PhD in mechanical engineering from Caltech, which is where I met Lindsay, actually. I'm currently an assistant professor at the University of Maryland in the aerospace engineering department, where I spend most of my time writing software and building unmanned air systems, which is just another way of saying that I work on drones.
The real way of saying
I work
on drones.
The real way of saying I work on drones. But that's a taboo word now, so we're not going to be using that anymore.
Yeah, but I might, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, the media still uses it.
So I'm allowed to, is what you're saying.
That's correct. Since you are media, yes, you can use drones. It's just because that the public has such, a sort of intangible gut reaction to the word drones now because of the sort of, I don't even know what the word for it is.
Well, here, let me ask you this. What is the technical wrong reason to use the word drone?
Drone signifies that the airplane or vehicle is completely doesn't have a brain or isn't connected to anything, and it's working by itself, which is really untrue for unmanned systems now, because behind every aircraft is a pilot, is another operator, is a team of 10, 20, 30 engineers who are monitoring what it's actually doing.
Okay, so here's my simplifying this out. All drones are unmanned aircraft vehicles, but not all unmanned aircraft vehicles are drones. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, you could say
that. Figured it out. So, with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what we plan to do, which is exactly what Mumu and I just did right now, which is talking about topical things in science, topical things in engineering and tech, and breaking them down and talking to people who are interested in them, study them, work on them, and all those kinds of things. So, Mumu, tell me a little bit about unmanned aircraft vehicles. And obviously we're talking about them everywhere. The one that landed in the White House by accident, the Super Bowl blocking all drones around the stadium. Why do we care so much, so sort of readily right now?
I think we care about them because we can actually do a lot of things with drones. So imagine everyday deliveries from fast food places or
Amazon.
Yeah, probably Amazon is the best one. So Amazon has these grand plans to have drone deliveries. So you can order, a book from the warehouse, and it'll be sent to your door in an hour.
So we have commercial usage, which is like what we would see with Amazon or Google or any of these companies sort of taking over our regional airspace and delivering things faster than you could by road traffic. And then you have the military, which we all know about, right, which are the bombings and things raids that go on throughout the world.
So there are So there are actually a couple of different civilian uses. So one, which is farmers or agricultural, the agricultural industry, they're really interested in using drones because they can actually go and survey their land and see, what things are, if there's if crops are healthy or not. So that's one usage. Another usage is from Hollywood. So movie sets can use drones to fly over and capture whatever scenes are necessary for these sort of aerial views. And then a third one is sort of in this search and rescue area, which is actually something that we've been working a lot at the University of Maryland, in that you can use drones to survey and find people and rescue people. And you can do that in a more efficient manner than having people on the ground.
Or search and rescue dogs or any of those kind of things.
Exactly. So I don't remember do you remember a few months ago there was that student that disappeared from UVA?
Yes.
So one of the companies that is making these unmanned systems was actually using their aircraft to go and try to search for the missing student. So
do they use like infrared, like they'd have an infrared camera or an infrared? Is that how they? I mean, can you add those sort of tools onto a unmanned vehicle?
Yeah, absolutely. You can add those tools. So basically, any of the aircraft that are available, you can add what they call a payload. And so most of the times, the payload is a camera, or it could be an infrared sensor. You're limited to weight, obviously, depending on how small your vehicle is. So most of these drones that you can actually go out and buy now are, the size of a basketball. And they run on batteries instead of sort of these gas engines. And so you can put a couple of pounds on there for a camera, but anything heavier than that, it won't fly.
Interesting. Well, that UVA case is a really good example. I don't think the general public probably knew that was being used as a sort of tool. When you think about it, it makes perfect sense. I mean, it's far easier for a flying object to search area than people on the ground.
Right. And, even in the military, the goal is to have these aircraft fly in situations that they call it the 3 Ds, dirty, dangerous, or dull. So you want to replace manned aircraft with unmanned aircraft in those 3 situations.
I like that. That's good. So what are the hurdles right now? Why can't we just sort of snap our fingers and just, I mean, our technology is so strong as it is. Why can't we just, say, okay, here we go. Let's just do it.
So the FAA is very strict on what can or cannot fly in national airspace. And they do it for safety reasons, essentially, because you can think of of sort of airspace right now as the Wild West in terms of we have for drones, in that we don't really know what they're capable of, and so the FAA, as sort of a first pass, is saying, okay, we're going to be very strict about the rules and sort of certification process in order to fly them, because we just want to be safe and make sure that nothing bad happens.
Well, this is just sort of popped up while you were saying that. The idea that UAVs or drones, I guess we're using those interchangeably at the moment, are they're so varied. It's not like one object, one type of machine. I mean, they can be massive in size, like the ones used by the military, and they can be the size of like a little mini radio helicopter, or even smaller. I mean, micro-sized. Yeah. And it just seems like such a vast span of things that will be have to be regulated by the FAA. I mean, it seems crazy if you're like, well, you can't fly over anywhere, but you can fly your little mini radio helicopter around your yard, right?
Yeah.
I mean, at what point?
Yeah. So sorry to interrupt. There are quite a few different exemptions and different categories that these drones sort of fall into. So you have them under, if they're under 55 pounds, then they have to withstand. So if they're under 55 pounds, then they have to obey a certain set of rules. If they're larger than that, it's a different set of rules. The FAA has an exemption for Hollywood, so that the movie sets are able to use their own drones without having to adhere to a lot of the sort of tests and certifications, just to say that they're safe. If you are a hobbyist and you just want to fly your own drone outside, if you go to a model flying club, you can go out and fly them under 400 feet without having to do really anything. But if you are a company or a university and you want to fly an aircraft, then you actually have to go through an entire process and get what is called a certificate of authorization. And
it seems like a giant, messy, gray area.
It is a giant messy gray area, and the reason behind that is that because the whole situation is so new, the FAA doesn't really quite know what rules it needs to create. So, I mean, if you think about it, if you wanted to go get a driver's license, you have to go to the DMV, you have to pass this, your driving test, you have to pass sort of a written test as well. And, there's certain questions that pop up, right? And certain things that you have to do. You have to parallel park, you have to, signal right, signal left. No one really knows what you have to do in order to show
to be a competent flyer of a
right. Yeah. So it's different. Being a pilot for a drone is different than being an actual pilot on an aircraft. They're two completely different things.
Yeah, but if you can do it on Xbox, right?
If you can do it on Xbox, actually that actually might be a better test for certification if you are sort of competent on Xbox as opposed to being an aircraft pilot, because they're two different skill sets.
You heard it here first. If PlayStation and Xbox start issuing licenses for UAV vehicles, we were the ones who came up with that, in case anybody was wondering.
Hear that, Xbox?
Yeah, are you listening? Well, you have students that come in, and what does sort of everybody understand all these problems with UAVs, or do you have sort of students who are aspiring engineers going, let's just build drones and fly them everywhere? I mean, where does the line of sort of understanding occur?
So students who come in are pretty much really excited about building their own drones. They say, let's create these things, let's buy all the parts, put them together, and then just go and fly and test it, which is fantastic. But because of these FAA regulations, we can't actually do that. So we actually have to go through the whole certification process, and that takes months. Sometimes it could even take up to a year, depending on how busy the FAA is to actually take a look at the paperwork. What was your question again?
No, well, I mean, my question is sort of like you were talking about two different spheres of knowledge of what really needs to go into these kind of things, and if people like me and the general public go, oh, cool, I'm just going to buy a drone for Christmas and fly it around. And then there's the people really working on this stuff realizing it's not that easy.
Right, and that's, it's not easy only because we don't know what the process is to make sure that it's safe. We can't guarantee that it's safe. So on the research side, a lot of the cool things that we want to think about is, well, can you actually fly a drone completely autonomously? And by that, I mean the pilot just says, I want the drone to fly from here to downtown Los Angeles, right? And so here is a vague word. So let's say that I want to fly my drone from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. If a drone is completely autonomous, I should be able to hit a button that tells it to do that, and it flies there without any sort of interference from me. So it can...
and does whatever it needs to do to make it there, depending on circumstances.
Exactly. It can go and refuel. It can sort of avoid birds, avoid trees. That's something that's completely autonomous. We don't have that capability quite yet. Right now, what we can do is the pilot is always in the loop. So the pilot is always sort of sitting there, seeing what the drone sees and making corrections for it. The research aspect to it is, how do we take the pilot out of the loop? And that's sort of not trivial question to take a look at. And the second really cool thing is looking into swarm technology. So if you have 10 of these drones, can you fly them in formation? Can they do certain tasks? The challenge is, how do you write software or build these drones that can do that? The more challenging task is, how can you ensure that what you build is not going to crash or not going to harm anybody? We can't guarantee that right now, which is also why the FAA has all these regulations.
Seems like there's a gigantic ethics problem here.
Right. There's definitely a huge ethics problem here when you talk about any sort of autonomous behavior. Who's ultimately responsible for the actions of a drone or a car or a robot? I would say that as academics in science or engineering, it's not quite at the forefront of what we're doing or thinking about. And that's because immediately we sort of try to jump in and figure out, what's cool and how are we going to get it to work properly. In order to get an engineering degree, we had to take an ethics course. So, on some level, we're always conscious about the impact of our work. But it's more of is this bridge strong enough to sustain weight or wind, rather than could this be used by someone in a harmful way?
So here's the moving forward question. If we jump, leapfrog over the ethics problem, and the FAA's sort of confusion and everyone's confusion of how to handle this. What's next? What's the fun tech that's coming out of here? What could these things be able to do in everyday society?
I think the next big step that we'll see is integration into national airspace, but integration into our daily lives. So Google, FedEx, all these companies, and Amazon, all these companies are looking into how do we incorporate them for delivery. I think that's going to be the easiest thing to incorporate into our daily lives. So you order something and it'll be used to deliver. I think hospitals will be using them for medical deliveries or medical device deliveries in medicine as well. And I think law enforcement I think law enforcement will be using them quite a bit to survey, to perform these search and rescue tasks. So I think that's going to be the big next step.
What's the timeline on getting something like that working effectively? I mean, obviously there's the legal and the government and all those other things, but what's the timeline on having a functioning product that could do those things well?
Technologically, we can already do that. I think now the question is, can we do that in on a sort of larger scale? So can multiple aircraft be deployed to deliver your groceries? And I think that what needs to happen is that things need to be tested out for a certain amount of time. So you might have a test city, you might have a test set of aircraft where you go and fly them for X number of hours, and so that the X number of hours is to be determined to where we feel safe that we can actually integrate that.
Stepping back a little bit and more into what you've seen and what you've done and what you're working on, what is the one thing that stands out to you that is so cool that you can't wait to get your hands on, or is super neat that nobody would necessarily think about? Something that's sort of unique, at least to you, or that is a rare side of drones that people may not think about.
Oh gosh, that's a great question.
I ask those sometimes.
What do I think? I think what would be really cool, and I touched on it a little bit, is this sort of notion of swarm technology. So if you think about bees and their drones, these worker bees, they are able to perform a lot of complex tasks, but each of them individually, each individual drone is as sophisticated. So the cool thing, what we're gonna sort of see, what I would like to see, is to be able to have sort of these multi-vehicle cooperation tasks done in a way where, as a programmer, I wouldn't even have to program that in. I could just say, you have to avoid crashing with something else, and then go and have all these robots go and clean my house.
I would love that. That would be wonderful.
Right, and then they would come back and recharge, and the place would be immaculate.
Well, here's the sort of extra extension of that question. Where do you think we, as a tech society, Western society, will be in 10 years, if that's the right window, when it comes to integrating our lives with either it's AI or drones or whatever it is?
I think it's a little bit easier to answer that in terms of the autonomous cars, because they're already we're already working on integrating that into sort of everyday life. So I think in 10 years we're going to see probably a combination of self-driving cars and cars where humans are actually driving them, or conventional cars or everyday cars. Within 10 years, I think that's a hard question to gauge, because things are moving so quickly right now in this sphere. I'm hesitant to say that that drones will be integrated into national airspace, but
that may be longer process than 10 years.
But not because the technology is not there, just because I think if someone were to get hurt, I think that would be a major. I think the FAA would be very cautious, and we all as a society might be very cautious about proceeding forward.
So here's my last question, and grilling you about all these things. If you put any time limit on it, what are you excited to see or wish will appear? Something maybe not feasible yet, maybe not even sort of designed yet, but what, in terms of drones or UAVs, would you love to have functioning in your society or your daily world?
Well, so for anyone who's ever read Harry Potter, you know that the wizarding world depends on owls in order to send messages or deliver packages, and I think a personalized or a personal drone / owl would be my dream. So to have something that I could use to deliver messages, to deliver things to someone else, would be very, very cool.
Might be a little slower than texting.
Yeah, maybe not so much for sending emails. Actually, what would be really cool is when we were talking with Scott about Everlane and their model is to deliver clothes within an hour. That's very feasible if we were to integrate all these drones into the sort of daily life.
Well, and that sounds far more economically feasible as a company. And just to give some background, is a friend of ours that works at a fashion company that's talking about doing 1 hour delivery within the city. The idea that would be far cheaper as a business proposition than having a human being running around in circles delivering things and picking up things.
Right. And so, one of the I guess the limiting factor for this technology, actually there is one, is the same thing with these electric cars, is the battery problem. So right now these basketball-sized drones can fly for about half an hour. And so, that's your radius for how far you can actually travel and deliver things.
Unless you had some sort of way of charging.
Right, if you had mid charging or battery swaps. Same problems that Tesla is having with their electric cars in terms of battery sizes and sort of the capacity for these batteries.
So as the battery technology, so a lot of this stuff, just like electric cars, and so all these things are dependent on these sort of you said limiting factor, but batteries and power, and what we can do to, once that sort of quote unquote problem is solved, then all of this becomes a whole lot easier.
Exactly.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me, although I still want my swarm of drones cleaning my apartment. That would be super helpful.
That still creeps me out a little bit. Like, what if one gets lost under the couch?
It's still going to be cleaning under the couch, isn't it?
Maybe.
Anyway, so I think that may give you a better sense of what at least Mumu does, and that I ask questions. That's what I do. But I guess that sort of wraps up our first attempt at a podcast. What do you think, Mumu?
I think that sums it up pretty well.
I also think that drones, UAVs, whatever you want to call them, are a topic that we're going to be coming back to quite a bit, whether it's Mumu talking about it or we have other friends of ours or people on our show here that will talk about different elements of these things. Because I think, as we've just talked about, they're all over and they're engaged in sort of all different parts of science and development, whether it's figuring out search and rescue and doing those kind of things versus military. So I think we haven't exhausted this topic by far.
No. Oh, one thing I should mention, you can splice this back in further up, is that there is this one company that is interested in using drones to paint houses. So they would have these little tiny helicopter type aircraft with spray guns to sort of paint the outside of the house.
Would you have to tape it first, or would it would it be able to avoid the windows? How does that work?
I don't know. That's their dream,
cool
is to be able to paint
though.
the house with these sets of
I think I would vote for window washers over paint.
Oh, that's a good idea too. Window washers.
See, there we go.
They haven't thought of that so far. Yeah, there's a lot of technological hurdles for the house painting.
We need to have a list as we continue this podcast of you heard it here first ideas. So just if you were keeping count, it's the drones washing your windows and getting your
Xbox
drone driver's
certification.
license via Xbox or PS3 or 4 or whatever it is these days.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I
We
think,
have to start keeping a tally.
and start charging
Oh, patents, please.
patents.
Anyway, I think we've pretty much wrapped it up for today. What do you think, Mumu?
I think so. Thanks for listening to our first episode of Beyond the Microscope. We hope you found it interesting, and we'll be coming back for round 2.
If you have any ideas for topics we should cover, people we should talk to, or general suggestions, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at Scope Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
You have been listening to Beyond the Microscope, and our theme music was composed by The Copycuts.